Thank you for coming. My name is Gary Oliver. You might have guessed that, but you never know. And I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Healthy Relationships and Professor of Psychology and Practical Theology here at JBU. And this is my 24th year. They've had a hard time getting rid of me, so I'm still here. And this was originally planned primarily for JBU staff and faculty. Amy and Melinda and the folks in the HR department, we had the first conversations. And then some friends heard about this and asked if they could come. So we have a lot of folks from JBU and some friends from outside the community, and y'all are welcome. Let me mention up front, and I'll say this more than once. Those of you who have heard me speak know I say things more than once. This is not a one and done event. You're going to come, we'll have about 2 hours, and I'll talk about your workbook here in just a sec. It's going to be easy to listen to this, fill the blanks in, and go and say that was helpful. But a part of dealing with emotions in general, and anger in particular, is beginning to change reflexive patterns, most of which are unconscious, okay? And so and you'll understand, in fact, you'll learn more, probably 99% of you, about emotions in general, about anger in particular, and even for many of you, about how our brain works in the next 2 hours than you knew at this point, okay? Change takes time. Information does not in itself lead to transformation. And so the reason why I've spent so much time putting together a workbook for you is that some of you will go home and follow the workbook someplace, and that's great. I know you enjoy your time today. But the odds are good that within 2 weeks, if you don't review it at least once, you're going to forget 95% of what you've heard. That's just the way it is. Now, that's information in general. But when we're talking about stuff that impacts patterns that you've had since you were a baby, seriously, reactions, it takes a little bit more time. Not as much as you might think. But I really want to encourage you again. This is not one and done, so it's not a matter of just coming and listening and hopefully enjoying it. Review and revisit this. And if you know somebody else is here, maybe talk with them about it. And you can ask, what did you think? But that's not the most helpful question. The most helpful question might be, what's one thing that you've applied? Okay? What's one thing that's been helpful for you? Because again, so often we can leave these kinds of things with all kinds of information. But those of you who aren't from JBU on your way home, just even prayerfully, just say, Lord, what's one aspect of my life, of how I react or respond to folks you might want to help me change and grow in and become healthier? Does that make sense? Okay. Again, this workbook is a resource. There are things here that I won't cover purposefully. There are things that you'll go back and want to read. There are some exercises that I'll have you do at your table. If along the way you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask. Now, one of my many handicaps is that I can't stand still and teach, so I walk around and I use my hands, okay? One of my other handicaps is several, which those of you who don't know my story, I won't tell the whole thing, but some of you may notice I have a unique accent. And I have some folks ask if I'm from New Jersey. I don't know why. But this is not a New Jersey accent. This is the MD Anderson Cancer Center accent, okay? And I've had cancer 8 times. I've had 7 surgeries. And in my 7th surgery, they removed 80% of my tongue and took muscle off both legs and put it in my mouth. So I have 20% of my actual tongue, 8% of muscle for my legs. Fortunately, I was very buff, and so there was a lot of muscles to take from. It's not that funny. So they told me I'd never speak again. I'd have a feeding tube the rest of my life. It took about 6 months to learn how to say my ABCs again. So If you think I talk a little funny, A, I do. But I think you'll understand most of what I say. Between the PowerPoints and the workbook, I think you'll be fine. But if you have some questions, don't be embarrassed, okay? Or during the break, feel free to ask me. I'll be masked during the breaks because I'll be closer to y'all, but I'll have my mask off to teach. So far, so good? Well, let's have a word of prayer. Lord, we pause and just take a few breaths. Most of our minds are racing, and I know we all have, at least I do, my to-do list for this afternoon, trying to jump in. But God, you brought us here for a reason. And help us to have open minds and open hearts. First of all, not for maybe how we can use this for others, but what you might want to give us in these next couple hours. How you might want to help us better understand what a great and gracious and creative God you are. And maybe gain a greater appreciation for what it means that we're image bearers. And God, we also pray not because this is JBU, but we thank you for JBU. This wouldn't be happening without John Brown University. Our Center for Healthy Relationships wouldn't be happening without JBU. So we thank you for the school. We pray for the leadership. And then specifically for our time together, again, God, may we have open minds and open hearts to what you want to give us. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. One of my favorite places to travel is the Grand Tetons. And I've been there probably about 35 times. I'll be going back up again this September. And last summer, a friend of mine and I, who've been going there for about 7 years every September, hiked back up into a lake that most people never go to or see. And across the lake, we saw this tree kind of growing out of a tree. And I just thought about that. The word flourishing came to my mind. And during life in general, but especially the last couple of years, flourishing's been hard. It's been more surviving. It's been more treading water. And boy, a lot of different emotions have come for some people. And I've had calls from folks who I never thought would give me a call because of the isolation, because of the change in their schedules, because lack of interaction with stuff they've been repressing for years and years and years. Troubling time brings out stresses and it brings out pressures. And we can only stuff, repress, suppress, deny, and ignore for so long. I'll talk more about that in about an hour, okay? And with stress and pressure tends to come our proclivity to have an angry response. Because as you're going to learn, anger is never just about anger. Anger is always a secondary emotion. It's always about something else. And I have had probably 15 to 20 books in my library just on anger. That's a concept you don't hear a lot. That's a bias that I've had after my years of studying, my years as a clinician, and in my own life. So I'll be unpacking that more for you. So I love the idea of flourishing. And so often it's easy for us to allow our circumstances to determine our reality. Okay? What happens to us by default often determines how we're going to respond or react, our value, our worth, our hope. I can't change what happens to me, but with God's help, I have choices on how I choose to respond. But oftentimes that involves changing reflexive patterns that don't help but hinder. Okay. LifeRelationships.com. This is a 60-second commercial. We have a new website, and on our website, it's much easier to navigate. We have more information. We have things for the community, resources there, I think, maybe 200 articles on parenting and marriage. All this stuff is free, some videos and things for JBU students and for ministry leaders, which is a part of what we do, which I don't have time to go into today. So, part one, emotions, where, what, and why. Where do emotions come from? Well, the Bible says that we've been made in the image of God. You've all heard that. But what the heck does that mean? I mean, when I ask folks what that means, why we're made in God's image, yeah. Okay, so can we walk on water? I mean, Well, most agree that a part of what it means is like God, we have a mind, we can think. Like God, we have a will, we can make choices, we have agency. And like God, we have emotions. So we can think, and we can make choices, and we can feel. And like the triune God, we were made to be in relationship with Him and with each other, vertically and horizontally. Here's might be a more helpful way to view it. So we have a mind, we'll call that IQ, or a head. And other words for that are mind, cognitive knowing, intellectual thinking. We also have emotions, or heart. And then we also have relational intelligence, or will. So IQ, mental, EI, emotional intelligence, heart, and RI, relationships. So just as God has a mind, we have a mind. Just as He has a heart, we have one. Just as He has the ability to be in relationships, so do we. So this is a practical way of me visualizing what does it mean that you and I are image bearers. Now, growing up in an evangelical fundamentalist home, and then going to several seminaries, I have a Master of Divinity and a Master of Theology. We didn't talk about emotions much. Now, maybe you did growing up, but in my experience, I heard Jack. That's not a real clinical term, isn't it? I heard nothing about emotions except don't be angry. That's pretty much the one that I heard. So learn good stuff, do good stuff, don't do bad stuff, and your life will be fine. The problem is, as I got older, and then as I got in ministry, I realized that most of the time when people fail, they fall, relationships fall apart, friendships are betrayed, abuse, divorce, leaders who have all kinds of gifts because of their own insecurities they don't understand. They become demagogues and dictators, and they become a legend in their own mind, and they end up using power to abuse. Abuse takes all kinds of shapes and forms, and it's not just people who don't know Jesus who do that, unfortunately. So the affective side of who God's made us to be is probably one of the least understood among believers. And yet it's, I won't say more important, but certainly as important. So here are many Christians that come out of seminary. Okay, I'm making fun of myself. Okay, but when we go to school, we get all this information, all this knowledge, and somehow this information knowledge is supposed to translate into happier, fuller, richer lives. That's not usually how it happens. Here are 4 simple verses. Behold, you desire in my innermost being and in my hidden part. As David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands he led them. Proverbs 4:23, watch over your heart with all diligence. I read that as a little boy. I had no idea what that meant functionally, but it was a nice verse. How about Jeremiah 3:15? Then I will give you shepherds after my own heart, who will lead you with knowledge and understanding. So what are emotions? Okay, emotions are a mental and physical state that can rise spontaneously, they just happen, or through conscious effort. The more I think about how much better off somebody else is, how much better they're doing than me, how they have advantages that I don't, the more depressed I get, the more discouraged I get, the more frustrated I get, the more angry I get. Eh? So I can think in ways that are going to produce more stress, more anxiety, more depression, lead even for many to suicidality because I'm hopeless, I'm helpless. It's a road that people often don't know they're traveling, but they're traveling. Emotions involve a cognitive impact. So emotions involve kind of what I think and how I think. Emotions have a behavioral impact, and I'll show you this during our time together. And emotions have a physiological impact. They impact our respiratory, cardiovascular, and hormonal system. Several years ago, there was a survey taken by the JAMA, the Journal for the American Medical Association, and a random sample of physicians, mixed genders across the country were asked, what percentage of people have you admitted to a hospital with physical ailments that were probably caused or exacerbated by unhealthy emotions? The first survey I read, this was a number of years ago, was 68%. 5 years later, the survey was 74%. That's a big deal. But again, it's something that no one really talks about. Emotion or feeling. Some of you will get this. If you do, great. If you don't worry about it. But I'm often asked, well, how does emotion and feeling different? How are they different? I'm going to use those terms synonymously, but emotion, the way most researchers and psychologists use it, is a more or less unconscious, but at the same time vitally important physical response, okay? Biochemical, involves neurotransmitters to internal or external events, such things as fear of thunderstorms, rage that hadn't been deceived, or the pleasure that results from getting a present we really, really want. By contrast, feeling designates a conscious perception of an emotion. So emotion is more or less something that happens in our emotional brain, and feeling is kind of the name we put to that emotion. You say, well, Gary, I'm not sure I understand that. Don't worry about it. What are emotions? There are over 600 words used to describe emotions. There are 42 muscles in our face that we use to express them. This is amazing. And that's why often you can read somebody's emotion before they even start talking to you. Now, your interpretation may not be accurate, okay? But we automatically assume that our interpretation is accurate, okay? So if Ted comes up and to me he kind of looks upset, then unconsciously I assume that what's going to come out is from someone who's upset. I have no idea if my interpretation is accurate, but we all do that. Emotions are a great source of information. So why do emotions matter? Well, let's talk a bit about the neurology of our emotions. I won't take a long time, but this is very important. The emotional brain helps us make quick decisions. Okay, so we have an emotional brain and a rational brain. And the emotional brain helps us make quick decisions. So, a person sees what they think is a snake. That goes up to the thalamus, which is kind of like, in Kansas City, there's a big railroad yard, and in the center there's a tower. And that tower directs trains, like if a guy or woman there push a button, the train would go up to Chicago or New York or to Charlotte or maybe down to Dallas, okay? Well, the thalamus kind of, part of what it does, it directs incoming information. 25 years ago, we didn't know this. When I was trained as a psychologist, we could only study dead brains, okay? But now with neuroimaging, we can study live brains. And now we know that when information comes up to our thalamus, there's a back door that goes down to our amygdala. Our amygdala is part of our emotional brain. So before that information ever hits our rational brain or our prefrontal cortex, it goes down to our emotional brain. And God has wired our central nervous system to keep us alive. So the main purpose of the amygdala, our central nervous system, is to keep us alive. As little kids growing up, from mom and dad at home, we learned that this isn't safe. These people aren't safe. Certain genders may not be, certain jobs, certain colors of people may not be safe. We learned that before we knew we were learning anything. So those biases are kind of there. Now, the amygdala, if it senses danger, it has a fight or flight or a freeze response. So the job of the amygdala is to react. And by the way, guys, this isn't theory. This is based on now well-standing medical neurobiological science. So I'm not making any of this up. This is not my opinion. What does the amygdala do? Stores partial memories of threatening and painful events. This is important. And you can go ahead and read those while I'm talking. As soon as we come out of the womb, our amygdala begin. In fact, we now know this happens even in the last trimester in utero. But when the baby comes out, our amygdala begins to store partial memories of anything that was a threat or danger to our mom or to us. Our main memory bank doesn't begin to really go online until about 12 to 16 months. Okay? Now, we have some, but our amygdala is active just like that. So it's our Department of Homeland Security. Again, its job is to keep us alive. It sounds the alarm. It reacts rather than responds. Underline the word reacts and underline the word responds in your notes. That's important. It releases chemicals throughout our body. And it releases chemicals to activate our body for fight, flight, or freeze. The amygdala does not distinguish between real or imagined threats, or between physical, emotional, or social threats. A threat is a threat. Sound the alarm, all hands on deck. So, as our feelings change, this mixture of neurotransmitters travels throughout your body and your brain, and they're literally changing the chemistry in every cell of our body in a millisecond. Not theory. This is not theory. So, what's the amygdala hijack? Well, there's a trigger. I got triggers, you got triggers, all children got triggers. Now, as we become older, or even after our time this morning, you're going to be more aware of some of your triggers. And that's going to be so helpful. Then, there is an immediate or instant reaction. There is a strong emotion, oftentimes anger or fear, and then there's a subsequent feeling of remorse. The strong reaction is usually I say something, I do something, something comes out of my mouth, you feel insulted, you feel maligned, you feel discounted. You come home, and if you're married, your spouse says something like, you know, what you've been doing all day, and you come home and you're toast, you've killed yourself, and you'll share with him or her your opinion of them and their intelligence and their very low level of sensitivity before you realize what you're saying. Have you ever heard somebody say something unkind, kind of mean, with a nasty tone of voice, and saw the expression on another person's face and realized it was you? It was what you said? I have. Just once, but that bad. So let me show you what, and I don't have time for a lot of video illustrations, but this one's powerful. Let me show you kind of what amygdala hijack looks like. Here's some friends of mine. This is an old clip. I've never found one better. And they're at a university, and they're dating, and she has a major paper due the next day. He, as a great boyfriend, comes in and says, hey, you know, can I help you? And he wants to help her. Watch what happens. Watch her hijack, and then watch his.
Hey, you know, I'm going to take a study break. Do you want some popcorn?
What?
You want some popcorn? Lauren, do you want some popcorn?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Get out.
Wait, where's Poe?
What?
Not what, who? Edgar Allan Poe. Where is he?
Dead?
No, I don't mean in real life. I mean in my cards. I had this whole section of research on Poe for this English paper on these cards, and now the cards are missing.
Well, where'd you have them last?
I don't remember. What time is it?
10:15.
Oh, this is going to be the worst all-nighter ever. How could I have been so stupid to wait till the last minute to write this paper?
Well, Lauren, I've looked at your cards. You've practically written the whole paper out on the cards. You just have to put them together.
But I can't do that without the Poe cards, and I still need to type up the bibliography for the bibliography! Where's the bibliography?
Thought you said you had to type it up.
Yeah, but it's all handwritten out on this one piece of paper.
Well, where'd you have that last?
I don't remember. I am gonna flunk English.
Lauren, you're not gonna flunk English.
How could I have been so stupid to think I could take honors English? I might as well just go into class tomorrow and say, hey, Dr. Leo, why don't you just flunk me now? Save us both a lot of trouble. I'm stupid. I can't write.
Oh, come on, of course you can write. You crank out term papers like a factory.
Would you stop trying to fix this? I'm just saying this is the worst ever.
You're not being real rational right now, you know?
I don't want to be rational.
Golly, you know? I mean, you're all emotional.
I like being emotional.
Well, fine, you know? That makes me feel like I've got to do something about it.
Well, you can't.
Well, that makes me feel like a failure.
How does my being stupid make you feel like a failure?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is all my fault.
Look, this is my emotional crisis. You can have yours in a few minutes. I'm not blaming you. The bibliography. Thank you, Jesus. That's right. I put the bibliography in there because the Poe cards. Weren't you going to make some popcorn?
Are you psycho or what?
What?
I just watched your personality change. You went from like 0 to 70 in 2 seconds.
Well, I was upset. I couldn't find my cards. I found my cards. I'm not upset anymore.
I'm still upset.
But why? You didn't lose your cards?
I know. I just innocently came in here to make some popcorn.
And?
I got blindsided by emotional shrapnel, thank you. I mean, what was that?
I was upset. I needed some support.
Well, why didn't you ask for it?
But I did.
When?
Well, in not so many words.
I can't read your mind.
That's obvious. Look, I really need to get back to this now. I'm sorry I got you upset. Thanks for listening.
Oh, you're welcome, I think.
Hey, can I have a kiss?
No.
Why not?
I don't know. When I figure it out, I'll tell you.
Dan, why are you in a bad mood?
I don't know. I wasn't in one when I walked in here.
Well, we need to discuss this.
No, we don't.
Yes, we do.
No, we don't.
Dan, you are being ridiculous.
I'm being ridiculous? You're the one who almost had a coronary over losing index cards.
But I'm over it.
Well, I'm not.
But wait, did I do something? Like, what did I do?
Do? I mean, I've never seen you that weird.
That wasn't weird. That was normal.
Normal for who?
Well, for me, for my girlfriends.
Your girlfriends act like that too?
Well, when they've had a day like this and something like this happens, yes.
Well, all right, what do you do when your girlfriends act like that?
Well, I just listen. I mean, that's all you need.
But that's what I was doing.
But you don't need to fix it. You don't need to say anything.
Right, I don't need to say anything.
Well, you could just say like, uh-huh. I mean, that's very helpful.
And your girlfriends do that?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, I know exactly how you feel.
Uh-huh.
See, that's very helpful.
Does a guy have the right to just leave the room when a girl gets like that?
Well, sure, if you're careful. Look, don't guys ever get like this?
I don't know. I think I'd just go play basketball instead. I mean, girls are very different from guys.
I know. Isn't it wonderful?
Uh-huh.
No, really. Isn't it wonderful?
Uh-huh.
Do you really mean that?
Uh-huh.
Because I think you're wonderful.
You do?
Uh-huh. God created us male and female. We're not only physically different, but we're emotionally different as well.
Uh-huh.
So that is Jim and Carol Shores, S-H-O-R-E-S. They're good friends of many years now. And they have a ministry called Acts of Renewal. And they come into churches and communities and use humor and stuff. They're a great couple, and I want to give them thanks for letting me use that. So we have an emotional brain, and the emotional brain helps us make what kinds of decisions? This is like a group participation moment. The emotional brain helps us make what kinds of decisions? Quick. The rational brain helps us make, okay, emotional what? Rational. Both are important. So we have the same scenario. A snake, amygdala, thalamus, amygdala, then goes back to our visual cortex and then up to our prefrontal cortex, our PFC. Now, if you look at that oval, what do you see there in that oval? A hose, yeah. A garden hose. So in Arkansas, we have snakes. Let's say you live where you have trees around your property. It's dusk. They're walking out. You see something green and coiled. Your amygdala says, snake, danger, run, go to the hole. By the time it goes up to your rational brain, oh, that's just a snake. Danger's off. So that information goes back to the visual cortex and down to your amygdala. And your amygdala calls off the dog. So if you want to know who let the dogs out, it was the amygdala. The problem is that once those neurotransmitters and hormones are cascading through your body, it can be hard to shut them down just like that. Most studies would suggest that men have a more difficult time, that most men have a more difficult time recovering from an amygdala hijack than most women do. There are always exceptions, okay? But this example that Jim and Carol gave here, where she was able to breathe and self-soothe, that's not uncommon. Variety of reasons for that. We don't have time to discuss it. They're all theories, but they're fun. So far, so good? Okay. So, how fast are our two brains? The rational brain processes info in 500 milliseconds. That's pretty fast, huh? 500 milliseconds. The emotional brain processes information in 2 milliseconds. So our emotional brain processes information 250 times faster than your rational brain. And that, I hope, explains some of what I've been talking about up till now. Watch this.
So this is your brain. Your brain has different sections that do different things. Let's take a look at the 2 sections that help keep us safe. The first section is the amygdala, which is sort of in the middle here. And the second is the frontal lobe, which is here up front and at the top. Since amygdala and frontal lobe are not the friendliest of terms, we've nicknamed them Amy and Flo in order to give them a little personality. Now, here's what Amy and Flo do for us. Amy is the body's security system. She is always on the lookout for any kind of threat. Whenever she sees danger, she pulls the lever and floods the body with hormones so we feel tense, angry, afraid, or all of these. This is known as the body's fight or flight response. Amy is all about helping us survive, versus Flo here, who helps us thrive. Flo is the body's central processing unit. She is the one who can think things through. She can judge whether something will make us happy or not. She can decide to reach for a goal, and she can plan on how to get us there. It's a good thing we have both Amy and Flo, because ever since caveman days we've faced different kinds of threats. Whether it's better to have Amy or Flo be in charge depends on the kind of danger we face. In this situation, Flo might be thinking, okay, I can think of 3 strategies to handle this. Let's process. But thankfully, Amy is quick to respond to danger without Flo, and has already pumped the body full of hormones so he can run fast. However, with other kinds of danger, like when faced with tricky relationship issues, Amy actually works against us because she has so few strategies. Let's go back to that flight or fight stuff we mentioned earlier. There's flight. Whether it's avoiding problems or opportunities, running away doesn't help us thrive. And fight. Whether it's your boss or your sweetheart, using fighting words rarely ends well. So you can see that Amy's strategies do a great job of protecting us from physical danger. Those same strategies don't always work well with emotional danger, but because she sees danger as danger, she sounds the alarm regardless of the situation. Even if Flo has the situation under control, Amy will pull the lever so our heartbeat quickens, our breath gets shorter, we start to sweat, and our muscles get tense. None of this helps with emotionally trying situations, like maybe when we're interviewing for that job we've always wanted. Or we finally get that first date. Or just when we have to tackle the bills. For situations like these, and with other emotional dangers, how can we get Amy to take the passenger seat when we really need Flo to drive? You may have already trained to get Amy and Flo to work together in certain physical danger situations. But here, we'll look at some ways to get Amy to just relax when we're facing emotional danger.
So I've taken a bit more time on helping us understand the neurology of emotions because it really is important. What factors impact how we do our emotions? Gender, age, family of origin, religion, spirituality. I grew up with some friends who were pew-jumping Pentecostals, and I had some friends who were really Reformed Presbyterians, and the Pentecostals, you saw all their emotions all the time, and my Presbyterians on the far end, I didn't know if they had any emotions. So that's a bit of humor, but kind of where we come from, our denominational background, what part of the country is it that we come from? Ethnicity, personality type, education, life experience. I could spend a half hour and meaningfully unpack these for you, but this will just give you an idea. So as you think about, kind of what might impact my emotions, think about your family of origin. Think about kind of where you grew up face-wise. Were emotions okay to have? Were emotions ever talked about? When I grew up, I heard all kinds of sermons on prophecy and end times and Daniel's visions and statues and the gold toes and stuff. I never heard a thing about emotions except anger, don't have it, and love. Love and don't be angry. De facto, that's pretty much all we had in that heart emotion category. Maybe yours was different. I hope so. Okay, before we go to part 2, take just a few minutes at your table, and you all have name tags. I'd like you to share to whatever degree you're comfortable. What's one thing you learned about emotions in general from this first section that either you didn't know or you found especially helpful, okay? And that you might choose to apply. Don't need to disclose anything. I want to honor your comfort level, but I found it really helpful when you're given a lot of information to have a few breaks to process, so what. Does that make sense? Okay, you have 3 minutes. Don't waste it. One more minute. One more minute. Okay, part 2, understand your most powerful emotion. Good conversations, by the way. I wish I could give you a wee bit more time, but we'll have a few more of these. The Bible and anger. How often is anger mentioned in the Bible? In the Old Testament alone, it's mentioned 455 times. When I ask people what the top 3 emotions mentioned in the Bible, anger is never given. Love is number 1, anger is number 2. Okay? And I don't have time to unpack this. I have a quote there in the workbook for it, but whose anger is it? Most of the time it's God's anger. And there are a variety of Greek words and Hebrew words for anger. The anger used to describe man's anger, male and female anger, is almost always negative, reactive, dangerous. There is a word that, especially in the New Testament, they use for anger that is a healthy anger. You can go online and unpack those for yourselves. But Ephesians 4:19 and 20, I memorized that verse as a young boy. In fact, I probably got a Tootsie Roll Pop in Sunday school because I memorized before others did, which was very important. Be angry. You've all heard that, right? Be angry. That's an imperative. That means be angry. It's appropriate times to have anger. Anger is not always a sin. I mean, I remember I was writing my third book, and I was unpacking anger. On the way back from Sunday school, one of my boys said, "Dad, guess what we learned today? Did you know that it's always a sin to be angry?" And I wanted to stop off at the bar somewhere because, I mean, here's my son being taught biblically there's always a sin to be angry. No, it's not. Be angry, comma, and yet don't sin. Now, that's the only emotion where God says that. God never says, be loving and yet don't sin. Be kind, yet don't sin. Be forgiving, yet don't sin. Be patient, yet don't sin, right? You don't read that. The only emotion is be angry, imperative, yet don't sin, comma. Another caveat, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Now, that doesn't mean that by the farmer's almanac and before sunset you say to someone, hey, I'm really ticked off at you, and the sun's going to be going down in 15 minutes. We have to talk about it. That's kind of more metaphorical, okay? What that suggests is don't stuff, repress, suppress, deny, ignore it. Be aware of it, identify it, and then take it to Him. We'll talk about that. Okay, here's the biggest thing that I missed for years, and I've heard very few talk about. Be angry, and yet don't sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger, comma. Anyone know what that last part is? And give the devil an opportunity. Anger is the only emotion that the Bible says if I stuff, repress, suppress, deny, ignore it, if I don't deal with it, I am giving the devil an opportunity. I am making myself more vulnerable to all kinds of other stuff. And we'll unpack some of that in just a few minutes. That's a big deal, you guys. That's a big deal. Be angry and yet don't sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger and give the devil an opportunity. This quote is there in your notes. So what is anger? Okay, anger is a strong feeling of irritation, and depending upon how much sleep I've had, how long I've been working, how my day's gone, how my finances gone, the latest report on the news, some things don't irritate me at all one day, and a week later it just really pushes my buttons. And I'm off to the races. And a good time will be had by none. Okay? So this involves mindfulness and kind of my being more aware of myself, but that I don't have time to talk about that now. I talk about that more in the ERI workshop. But a strong feeling of irritation or displeasure. Anger is a state of readiness. Anger is energy. Anger is the most energizing, friends, of all the emotions. Fear drains us. Depression drains us. Grief drains us. Worry drains us. But when you and I have anger, adrenaline and noradrenaline is pumped into our central and peripheral nervous system, our body is on alert. Anger is the most energizing of all the emotions. Almost no one does that. So either we learn how to manage that or it manages us. Anger is a secondary emotion that is experienced in response to a primary emotion, such as fear, hurt, or frustration. Friends, if this is all you remember today, this is worth your time. Whenever you have anger, you always have something else. But it takes time to be mindful, to pause, maybe to do some breathing, and reflect. And you're not going to get this overnight. It might take you 3 to 6 months to begin to, in fact, I've worked with many folks where it took 6 to 9 months. Because you're identifying stuff that's reflexive. It's unconscious. You're not even aware it's going on. And one of the things that the Holy Spirit can do is to use the hard times in our lives and our unhealthy reactions to help us learn how to respond. We can reprogram a lot of those automatic neural pathways. I'll talk about that at the end. Through something God's given us called neuroplasticity. It's an amazing gift. So whenever you have anger, I'm so angry, okay? I hope more and more your mind goes, okay, Phil, what's really going on? Okay, Fritz, like what's the problem here? Okay, Amy, you've had this button before, so what's really going on? I hope you learn to tell yourself that, because you'll begin to discover what some of your primary buttons are. And that can change the whole course of a conversation, an evening, a week, a month, a work team, a family. It really can. It really can. Number 4, it's critical that we differentiate between the expression and the experience of anger. Guys, we can't always control when we have anger. But over time, with God's help, we can choose how we express it. Anger happens. Good bumper sticker, huh? Anger happens. How I express it, though, do I let it control me, or with God's help, do I control it? That's on me, baby. I can't, if I lose it, I can't blame you. If I lose it, I lost it. What comes out of my mouth is my mouth. What I say, I said. What I throw, I threw. It's on me. It's not on you. And we love to blame everybody else. But at some point, we have to belly up to the bar, okay, and say, it's me, O Lord, standing in need of prayer. Does that make sense? Most of you are going like this? Okay. Why is anger such a major problem? Well, it's such a misunderstood emotion, And in your book, I unpack more of this particular point. So I know you'll find that helpful. In fact, anger is the most misunderstood of all the emotions. We have all kinds of other names we give anger because to say I'm angry is not kind of cool, and certainly doesn't sound spiritual. And those of you who are leaders and managers or professors or ministry leaders, to say I'm angry, I'm going to put it in nicer words, okay? Because that's kind of embarrassing. To be where you are on the food chain of whatever company you're in and to be so immature that you have anger issues. I'm ticked off. Yeah, that's much better, or whatever. It's one of the most powerful and controlling of all the emotions. I know I've said that, but it's important to say it a different way. When not properly understood and dealt with, anger is one of the most dangerous. I've never heard of a plea in a court case, something done in the heat of anxiety, or in the heat of a crime committed in the heat of worry, or in the heat of depression. But I have heard of some defenses, a crime committed in the heat of anger. They usually don't win, but that is a defense some use, because when I let anger control me, my anger is controlling me, and I become a puppet of that emotion. It's a choice. We can learn how to change that. Anger has definite physical effects. Here's a short illustration of that. Of all the emotions we are born with, anger is the most primal and difficult one to control. Anger in one person is the one most likely to elicit the same emotion in another. In other words, if I'm depressed, you might not leave depressed, but if I'm angry, you're more likely to have anger. And of all the emotions, anger is the one most likely to push that button in somebody else. In fact, no matter how discreet, anger can generate anxiety, defensiveness, and aggression in the other person. The famous flight or fight reaction that every living organism contains. If you respond to someone else's anger, I should say react, with irritability, which is the way most brains are designed to react, the problem only gets worse. It just exacerbates the problem. Anger interrupts the function of your frontal lobes or your rational brain. Not only do you lose the ability to be rational, you lose the awareness that you're acting in an irrational way. We say and do stupid things, and oftentimes we're not aware of how stupid and selfish and how hurtful what we're saying is until a minute or a half hour or later. And we look back and say, oh my God, how? I'm so sorry. When your frontal lobe shut down, it's impossible to listen to another person, let alone feel empathy or compassion. I have a whole hour and a half, almost as long as I do on empathy and compassion. And unhealthy anger is one of the main things that keep us from having those. Instead, you are likely to feel self-justified and self-righteous, and when that happens, the communication process falls apart. Anger also releases a cascade of neurochemicals that actually, over time, destroy those parts of the brain that control emotional reactivity. Friends, this isn't theory. No one's making this up. This is based on now decades of replicated research and study. So, when we have anger, the hypothalamus gland is activated, dilated pupils, pituitary gland, sugar increases, blood pressure increases, blood clots faster, lungs move oxygen faster, the heart rate increases. This is in milliseconds, okay? Adrenaline flows, muscular squeeze, digestion and elimination come to a halt. So when you say someone who has anger is uptight, they are uptight. They are uptight in many ways. So, when it comes to dealing with anger, most people react to the secondary emotion rather than respond to the primary emotions that are causing it. This only complicates and exacerbates the problem. So you might ask, what are some of the major causes of anger? Okay? What kind of emotion is anger? Primary or secondary? Secondary. So underneath the anger, there's always one or more of these three primary emotions. Hurt. And, ooh, I forgot I had that. That's impressive. Isn't that nice? Yeah, okay. Okay. Hurt and anger, knowing the difference. So, we have awareness of our emotions and then the passing of time. So, anger, hurt is the first emotion that we feel. This isn't in the notes. So, and as time passes, our anger is the second emotion. Now, we're not aware of that first emotion. It doesn't take much time. We're aware of the anger. And then with more time, revengefulness is the third emotion to be felt. So, hurt, the primary emotion, is the least accessible to memory. And only as we think and pray and take notes of some circumstances where we have had unhealthy anger, will we become aware of this. Okay? I found this some time ago, and I have not used it in a long time, but I sat with it several weeks ago, and I thought, boy, this is helpful. And I've added this. Anger becomes the most accessible to memory. The hurt is the least accessible. In fact, I've had folks who've had anger issues for 25, 35, 45, 50 years, and they had no idea of where it really came from. I had a situation with a very wealthy, person, a woman. She was a matriarch in her family, and her kids finally talked her into coming to see me. She had heard me speak somewhere and thought I was safe. That was a mistake. But she had anger. She said, Doc, our dad died. He didn't like her. We don't like her. Our grandkids don't like her. No one, she didn't like herself. So I met with her a few times, and I kind of gained her trust. And so I said, called her first name, do you remember the first time that you felt a deep hurt? And right away, her face changed. I'm not embellishing a thing. I have to cut to the chase because of time, and she told a story of growing up in the Depression. And they lived in rural Kansas. Their family didn't have much money. And back in those days, flour came in bags with designs and prints and things. So she said, my mom made a lot of our clothes from flour sacks, flour bags. I remember going to school one day with a dress my mom had made, and there were two other girls. One was the daughter of the banker, and the other one was the one who ran the general store. And she knew their names still. Okay, I mean, this was coming up, and she hadn't thought of this in decades. It's just her face, as she's telling it, I could tell she was back there. And she said, I got to school, and around lunchtime, they started laughing at me and making fun of me about how poor we were. I'm wearing clothes from a flour sack. And she says, I remember crying, and I ran all the way home, several miles. And she said, on the way home, I told myself I will never let myself trust anyone again. And she didn't. And she's sobbing at this point. And long story short, it took some time, but she was able to deal with that and allow God to heal that and bring some restoration after most of a life and relationships ruined because of her letting her fears and what happened. And friends, that's not bizarre. That kind of stuff happens. Trauma, abuse can shape an entire life. So, moving along, frustration is more in the present. So, hurt in the past, frustration in the present, and then we have fear or anxiety in the future. So, many folks have found this illustration helpful. We have like the iceberg of anger. So, at top, we have what we're aware of. Below the line, we have what we're not aware of. And we have hurt, frustration, fear. But there are all kinds of other emotions that can kind of express themselves in hurt or in frustration or in fear, okay? So as you begin to process some of your own stuff, your own memories, what we're talking about here, it's not, the hurt comes from, and usually not just one thing. Our frustration doesn't usually come from one thing. Our fear doesn't come from one thing. And there are things that set us up, or maybe to make us more vulnerable to some of these. But before we go there, a couple of questions. Think to yourself, what triggers my anger? What are some of my buttons? And just maybe write 2 or 3 down. We all have buttons, you guys. We all have buttons. And what somebody else's buttons are don't matter. What are some of my buttons? In this last week, have you had some anger? Have you been ticked off? What were some of those buttons? Have you experienced some hurt? Have you been frustrated? Have you had some fear or anxiety? What triggers my anger? What are some of my buttons? Those are 2 similar questions. And then what are some ways I let myself become the puppet of others' behaviors, of others' actions? What are some ways that I let myself react? And here's a graphic that some people have found very helpful that help you unpack these questions. Many people, when they're hungry, they're more vulnerable to exacerbate the anger. When I have anger, it may be a low level, but the more I focus on the anger and the injustice and how unfair and woe is me and nobody loves me, everybody hates me, I think I'll eat some worms, it exacerbates it. Or when we're lonely. And you can have a lot of people around you and be lonely. You can have folks think you're wonderful and be lonely. In fact, the worst kind of loneliness is that kind that we have when we have a bunch of people around us who say they care for us, whatever, but don't know us. And as far as we can tell, don't really care to know us. They want to know who they want us to be, okay? But not us. Tired and stressed. So HALT is a simple acronym for this. Is this making sense? Most of you? Okay. So, we have destructive anger, which most of our anger is. Destructive anger reacts. And there are 3 primary kinds of destructive anger. And in the notebooks, I have a lot of words to unpack each one of these, okay? But first we have the cream puff. The cream puff is your passive. They tend to stuff it. So you put cream in the cream puff, you stuff the cream in the puff, and so the cream puff is oftentimes the codependent. It's all my fault. My job is to care for everybody. I'm wherever you are at work or on the food chain, if you're a parent, whatever the case might be, okay? But if people have problems, my job is to fix. I'm here for everybody. And again, if you understand the term codependent, your codependent is a classic cream puff. And sometimes in some circles, you are viewed as very spiritual if you're a cream puff. If you just stuff and stuff and stuff. In fact, some would define the job of a good and godly woman as to keep your mouth shut and stuff and be there for everybody. Okay? We don't find that in Scripture, but, okay? So we have the cream puff. That's our passive. Then we have the locomotive, and that's the aggressive. And the locomotive is like God's gift to the world. Okay? It's your pleasure knowing me. Okay? I have all answers, and I'm the one who makes the decisions. We'll talk, but the buck stops here. And if they ask for your opinion, you get the sense that your opinion isn't worth a rip. Okay? They went to a workshop and learned to ask for people's opinions. I'm a good manager. But most folks listen, but not very many people hear. See that? Most or many folks listen. Most folks don't actually hear. And so they don't really know how to listen. In the last 10 years, God's helped me make some big strides in that area. I've spent my life listening to people, but I've not always been the best listener. And listening to God becomes a whole different thing. And listening to God doesn't just mean reading some Bible verses and singing hymns and joining hands and doing kumbaya, okay? Listening to God involves being still and waiting and being silent. And the Bible talks a lot about that, but that's a different workshop. And then we have the steel magnolia. And this is your passive aggressive, okay? So we have the cream puff, passive, locomotive, aggressive, and steel magnolia, passive aggressive. And the steel magnolia may seem nice and delicate on the outside, but on the inside, maybe they're tough. And so oftentimes, if the steel magnolia is going to criticize you, they'll say it with a smile. In fact, another true story. I'm not embellishing this. I was doing a conference on anger, a women's conference in Rhode Island. I had about 400, 500 women there. Kind of really a fancy deal. And a woman came up in the break and said, "Doc, I've got a great illustration." And I said, "God knows I always need good illustrations." And she said, about 2 months ago, we had a high tea at our church. Now, high tea, if you don't know, is where you use fancy cups. You put your finger in the air, and you drink the cup as a tea when it's cold, but you smile a lot. And like maybe your belt's too tight or something. And at the church, we talk about very spiritual things. She said, I brought a neighbor friend whose husband left her after having 3 kids. He abused her. He abused 2 of the older kids. And she's had to have 2 jobs just to support the family. And I brought her, and she was dressed nice and not as fancy as some. And the woman in the church, who's married to a neurologist, and she has old money. Now, old money means that you did nothing to earn it. You happened to be born in the gene pool, and so she and her husband have not their own private area, but their own hill with their own gate. So, and she came up and she recognized her from the grocery store. And she said, "Well, Lois, you look so nice today, especially after having gained so much weight." Did she actually say any words that were unkind? No. She said, "You look nice today." And she had gained weight. But what was the message? Way too many French fries, baby. Cool as McDonald's. Okay? Yeah. And that's passive aggressive. Now, if this woman had said something back, well, that's hurtful. She would have said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were so sensitive. Please forgive me." A good passive aggressive can come back at you and get you again. So they smile to your face, but in your back you feel a knife twisting. Have you ever known someone like that? They're good. And they're not just people who don't go to church. So, cream puff, locomotive, steel, magnolia. Here's my favorite illustration. Whenever I get mad at you, you never seem to get upset. How do you manage to control your temper? I just go and clean the toilet. How does that help? Imagine how good that felt for her. I mean, I think she had a smile on her face. Maybe she was even praising God. I don't know. Okay, take about 3 minutes now. And what's one aha you had? Something you didn't know? Or something as you heard me talk about, it's like you sensed God saying, "You know what? That's something that might be really helpful to think about, pray about, or work on." Okay? Take 2 minutes. Again, only share what's comfortable with your group. Go.
voice my anger, how to express my anger in a way that is heard, but in a healthy way that is beneficial to me and for others. And so,
Okay, fun lovers, come back around. Um, Great discussion. And by the way, I teach this in corporate settings too. The hard part for me is that when I do that, I can't share the biblical spiritual references. So it's a bit different, but I always enjoy being able to teach here at JBU. Okay, constructive anger responds rather than reacts. Okay, big deal. It responds rather than reacts. Number one, it is controlled. Unhealthy anger controls us. Healthy anger is controlled, and we learn how to do that. It's proactive and not reactive. And I had two of you ask, how can we identify some of our buttons and what can we do about it? Well, I'm moving into this now. So if you find yourself wanting to do something to attack someone, get even, make them feel bad, your anger at that point in some way is controlling you. Okay? Healthy anger, constructive anger, and those are synonyms to me. And to me, the problem is never anger. Anger is not a sin. If anger is always a sin, God's in deep trouble. Okay? Unhealthy anger, that's the problem. And most of us have never heard about healthy anger, let alone how to cultivate it. It's motivated by a desire to be beneficial. It's not driven by a spirit of bitterness or resentment. You may have bitterness, you may have resentment. I have, but I have to confess that and deal with that and ask the Spirit to help me be more aware of God, help me to respond and not react, and not motivated by any desire to get even with, make someone pay, to point out what a loser they are, whatever the case might be. It involves listening to both our emotional brain and our rational brain, because both are important. It's focused on correcting wrong actions or situations, not getting even with or punishing somebody else. And guys, our automatic unconscious reaction is to want to make someone feel bad who's made us feel bad. And almost none of us think, gee, how can I make them feel bad? How can I humiliate them? Most of us don't do that. Some folks do. Most of us don't. It's a reaction. You hurt me, I'll hurt you. That has survival value in a certain time, because if I hurt you, you're less likely to hurt me. You're bigger than I am. Well, almost everybody is, but okay. So, but if I hurt you, you might be more likely to pick on someone else. Because you know if you hurt me, you can take me, but I'm going to make you pay something, Bubba. Does that make sense? So we have to really be aware of that. And we can't do what I'm talking about now until you understand a bit of what we've talked about for the last hour. The anger energy isn't merely spent, it is invested. So, and this is in your notes, I'm going to illustrate this. I won't spend time on these. But here's how healthy anger differs. We have here a mature responder. Responds, anger is communicated, motivated by respect, honoring, responsible and selfish, trusting, proactive, firm, caring, listens. It's an I win, you win. And this is a whole different mindset for most people. And for some of us, it involves a 180. And I grew up in a family, most of us grow up and we have a proclivity to one or two unhealthy emotions. So my sister struggled a whole lot more with anxieties and anger. I struggled more with anger. My dad had anger problems. My grandfather was incarcerated, who I never met, because of things he did in the heat of anger. Okay? So unhealthy anger has come down to all of our males. I've had depression or anxiety and stuff, but so many of us have maybe one emotion that is more of a problem than others, but we all struggle with unhealthy anger. So, what are some, and guys, this is not to do here, this is homework. What are some potential short-term benefits from not controlling my anger? And as you think about it, the only real benefit is I get a moment of satisfaction. I feel good for a minute. Yeah, they deserve that. That'll teach you. And then maybe a minute, maybe 5 minutes. It's like, And then, that's not who God made me to be. That's not who I want to be. And guys, every time you and I react, we are reinforcing those neural pathways. And we're making it harder for us to respond. If we don't take a thought captive, okay, it's going to continue to have us as its captive. So what are some potential long-term consequences from not controlling my anger? Well, in the first 5 minutes, I listed a whole bunch of them. It affects us mentally, emotionally, physiologically, spiritually. It impacts our central nervous system, impacts our resilience, our ability to think rationally, to respond rather than react, to make good decisions. I could go on and on. The consequences are massive. And it causes other problems that just exacerbate and complicate the anger problem. So what are constructive ways to manage our anger? Well, one, be aware of it. And here's a graph I put together, okay? So when you look back at some times when you lost it or your anger controlled you, at the very outset, what was the feeling? Irritated or insulted? What feeling did you have? You may have had several, but sometimes there are 2 or 3 more common feelings than others. And then what did you notice? Maybe your heart beat and your breathing increased, or you find yourself speaking more quickly. And then you found yourself avoiding or attacking when, wait a minute, you just slow down. Or then you find yourself talking more loudly, becoming more critical. The louder you talk, the more likely you are to talk louder. The more critical you are, the more likely you are to be critical. It just exacerbates it. Then you become aggressive, abusive, you actually attack, and then you explode. And then you maybe have regret, remorse, embarrassment, shame, unemployment, broken relationships, sad reputation, incarceration, and even death. These are the results, often, of unhealthy anger. And especially when someone becomes a rageaholic, like an alcoholic, their anger and that adrenaline and noradrenaline comes to change how they view and do almost everything. So this is not an exaggeration. So for you, you might ask yourself, well, you know what? When I hear myself being a bit more aggressive, abusive and attacking, I'm going to take it to God. I'm going to identify. I'm going to go back and look at the book that Gary put together, and I'm going to follow some of those steps. I'm going to read some of those verses. There are some resources in the back that I wouldn't even have time to get to. I gave those to you for later. Or if I'm aware I'm talking more loudly. You see, if I can catch it here, I can avoid all that damage. I can avoid all that pain. Or if I catch it here, if I find myself avoiding or attacking, I can avoid all that. Or if I become more mindful and I'm aware that my heartbeat's increasing, my breathing, I'm talking faster. You see all that we can avoid? But friends, this doesn't happen overnight. This takes months. It takes sitting down, writing some things out, not just thinking it. It ain't going to happen up here. It's not. It's not. It's going to happen here. It's going to happen here. The good news is it can happen, and it doesn't take a long time, but you have to be serious. And as I become more aware of when I feel insulted or marginalized or ignored, okay, this is an opportunity for unhealthy anger. This is an opportunity for me to react, or I can take every thought captive and say, God, this isn't fair. Please help this bozo the clown, this dipstick, this loser, this zit on the face of life who calls him or herself a human being. I probably shouldn't phrase that, but okay, that's kind of where they're at. And take it captive. And it's amazing how that can change the course of your reactions. I'll come back to this. Stop, look, and listen. Here's an empty chart that I kind of, you guys can use to kind of fill in your own. Some people, before you're writing it, you may want to Xerox a few copies so you can add it and show yourself in progress. Okay, admit and accept responsibility for it. I talked about this earlier. My anger is my anger. Okay? Determine who or what at the outset is going to have control. Am I, with God's help, going to control it, or is it going to control me? I can make that call. Okay? I can make that call. Exercise your emotional self-regulation skills. Call a time out for these 30 minutes, okay? If you're by yourself, call a time out from what you're doing and go do something else. Go for a walk, read some other verses. Just change your course for even a half hour. Have a cool down plan that works for you. Call someone and ask them to pray for you. Pray with you. Ask Flo what she has to say. Amy and Flo, remember? Okay. Take a hike. I mean, not take a hike, but go for a walk. Repeat Psalm 139, 23, and 24 3 times. Many people pray that psalm like this. Search my wife, O God, and know her heart. Try my poor husband and know his thoughts. See if there be any wicked, stupid, ignorant, immature way in my manager, and help them know where I'm right and they're wrong. Doesn't say that, does it? Unfortunately, it says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. See if there be any selfish, reactive, immature, irresponsible, or just wounded, or whatever. It's not all bad. Wait in me. And help me to become more the woman or man you designed me to be before the foundations of the world. Help me to walk and become more of that person who in you I am, and by your grace I'm becoming. And it's amazing how even that can change. Powerful song. Remind yourself of the positive things that healthy anger can provide. Yeah. Healthy anger can serve as an alarm. Stop, look, and listen. Something's going on. A button's been pushed. Healthy or unhealthy, I can't deal with, I don't acknowledge. Okay? Healthy anger is a source of energy. Remember, anger is the most energizing of all the emotions. I can spend that energy in destructive things, or I can invest it in solving a problem, listening, waiting, being patient, and helping others. It's my call. And I've heard folks say, well, I'm so young, I have so much energy, it's hard for me. And I've had some folks say, well, I'm too old, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, Bubba, you're not a dog. Okay? And as far as I know, no matter where we are in life, we can always, with God's help, learn some new tricks. So don't buy that stuff. if you're not even ambulatory, if you're breathing and conscious, we can change, and we can grow, and we can learn, and we can become. It's a powerful source of motivation, healthy anger. And it actually increases trust and intimacy in relationship. The people that I trust the most are those who will be honest with me. And they have issues they'll tell me. They'll tell me in healthy ways, but we won't dance or play patty cake. I'm never caught off guard by my close friends, because I know they love me enough to speak the truth in love. And that's when you find a trustworthy person like that, who's not impressed with who you are or what you can do for them or who you know, but who value you as a person, and they're going to speak truth to you, man, hang on, baby. They're hard to find. Define it. Number 5, identify the cause or source of it. And again, anger is always what kind of emotion? Okay, underneath it is what kind of emotion? Primary. Hurt and or frustration and or fear. Choose your response. How are you going to choose to invest the energy? I know I'm giving you a lot, but we're almost done. Practice the pause. When in doubt, pause. When angry, pause. When tired, pause. When stressed, pause. And when you pause, pray. It's so simple, huh? But it's not easy. It's not easy. But you can train yourself how to do that. I have. Let's move right into this next part. I won't spend a long time on it. But maturity, growing up, involves cultivating empathy. And empathy, sensing others' feelings and perspectives, taking an active interest in their concerns. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Real simple. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. The fact that I have X amount of degrees and have written so many books and have spoken to whatever, in a relationship, that doesn't matter. Do I care? Do you care? How high are you up the food chain of your business or company or institution? Do you care? Are you present? Do I have any value? What empathy isn't. It's not sympathy. It's not agreeing with somebody. It's not psychoanalyzing them. It's not minimizing the problem, nor is it fixing the problem. That is not empathy, but for many Christians, that's what empathy looks like, okay? And non-Christians too. That's not empathy. Empathy is recognizing and acknowledging emotions in others. And I can never acknowledge in you what I first don't acknowledge in myself. That's why the process always starts here. That's why Psalm 139, Search me, O God, and know my heart. Choosing to understand. Understanding doesn't happen. Boy, I can't count the times in Proverbs. He says, sell everything you have. It's more precious than gold or silver. Get understanding. It's noticing that someone is in pain. And if I'm all consumed with my own stuff, my own hurts, my own wounds, and my own agenda, and my own need to climb, I'm not going to notice much about somebody else. And people can tell. Fake empathy doesn't last very long. Looking empathetic, most people in a short period of time can tell if you're really present, if you really give a rip. Empathy involves being able to take the perspective of another person. Empathy is knowing that you can communicate empathy without saying a single word, just your facial expressions. 42 muscles in our face that express emotions. Being present, just being there. When I was younger, I would be present, but I really wasn't there. My mind was going over the next to do this, and I knew how to fake presence. But when I became a dad, my young boys, they could tell when I was there and when I wasn't. One time I'm reading the paper, my one young son's talking about something, and I'm going, Yeah, well, I mean, it was the Denver Post, the Broncos, very important. And all of a sudden, this little hand came down over the top of the paper. I pulled it down. And it got about 2 feet from my face, and he started all over. Because somehow he knew I wasn't present. How often do we fake presence? Sometimes maybe we have to be, but how about with important people to us? Knowing what not to say. Avoiding judging others is so easy, especially when you're so brilliant and spiritual and wonderful. Empathetic understanding involves both the emotional brain and the rational brain. Let me show you a short clip that illustrates well empathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Isn't that powerful? And you all see how this can't happen. This can't happen unless we have some emotional maturity. And we can't have that without understanding and knowing how to manage our emotions. It just doesn't happen. Barriers to empathy, ignorance of differences. Boy, I could spend a half hour, but I'm doing a 2-day training for a group out in California in October. And I'll be spending a half hour just on this one slide. And it won't be boring, but ignorance of differences, stereotyping. Much of that we do is unconscious. Expectations. Many of our expectations are unconscious. A critical attitude. Lack of emotional self-awareness. And poor communication skills. And I've addressed many of these in some of the things that I've just shared with you. So let's talk about the conflict and intimacy cycle. This is not a workshop on conflict. I'm going to go through this rather quickly. Again, I have a whole thing on conflict management, communication, but that's not this. But I think when I talk about anger, I need to share at least an overall view of what healthy conflict might look like. We start off with Mary and John, and they're attracted by their differences. one of the things that they're not aware of are that there are differences. Now, I'm going to illustrate, just for fun, male and female differences. These are somewhat stereotypic, okay, but I think you'll get the point. There are all kinds of differences. This is just one level. So, for example, the cognitive distribution of the female brain, a large verbal ability, need for excessive talking, ice cream receptor, very large, shoes, need for commitment, irrational thoughts, retail therapy, ice cream receptor, chocolate center, indecision lobe, argue and debate lobe, sense of direction nuclei, and the sex particle. It was a man who came up with this, okay? And this is meant to be funny, okay? Now, the male brain, there was a lot of input from women on this one, and much of it is sex, but there's a lame excuses gland. Most men have a much better ability to make lame excuses and fake things than many women. Remote control addiction center, nothing at all. Women don't have a nothing at all area, but men, when you ask some men what they're thinking, they say nothing at all. They're thinking nothing at all. There's a flat line. If you could put up electrodes, there's no brain activity. I don't know. Driving a stick shift, math stuff, dangerous adventures, ball sports, attention span very small for many men. More nothing at all. Interruption lobe, gastrointestinal pride. Most men have this built-in music ability, and they love every sound the human body makes. And most women don't have that same appreciation, which is kind of sad. Personal hygiene cell. So these are just commitment molecule. We all have all kinds of differences. Now, seriously, these are stereotypic, but yet there are differences based on all the things I gave you before. Gender, family of origin, okay, all those things I listed impact, and no matter how intimate the relationship is, they're there. So as John and Mary get closer, they have disagreements. And as they have disagreements, the disagreements lead to conflict. And conflict always leads to two ways to handle it. Healthy conflict provides opportunity to increase understanding and deepen trust in a relationship. So when you get home, this is another homework thing for you, probably take a good 10 minutes at least. In my childhood home, I learned that conflict was what? Good, bad, unhealthy? Some of you never saw your parents argue, but you know they did. Some of you heard your parents argue and fight, and that's all you grew up with. Some of you saw your parents split, and maybe the next set of parents split. Today, my immediate reaction to conflict is to blank. So conflict then leads again to usually two ways to interpret it. Most people, probably 98%, our immediate reflex is to have a negative interpretation. Avoid it or attack it. Conflict's bad, it's wrong, it's unhealthy, it's never helpful, avoid it like the plague. And so when we do that, we go back to our differences, we do the dance again, we bump up against the wall of conflict, and that dance begins to define us. So when I make a negative interpretation of conflict, I view it as a pain to avoid or a problem to solve. And when that happens, when I have fear, hurt, frustration, the primary emotions, it leads to what emotion? Got to guess? Anger, sharp group. And that leads to avoid or attack. And that leads to division and distance. And this is a very common pathway. And again, almost none of us are aware that this is where we're at. This happens. It happens. Sometimes in a short period of time. When I make a positive, healthy interpretation, it becomes an opportunity to grow. The healthiest marriages I know are the marriages that have learned how to deal with conflict and manage conflict. That increases trust, it increases understanding, increases presence. I've learned more about my buttons. I've been able to help others learn more about their buttons, okay? So when I view it as an opportunity to grow in God's hands, I'm more open to problem exploration. This leads to collaboration. This leads to understanding. Unless I explore a problem, unless I collaborate, I'm not going to understand. How can I? How do you spell fat chance? It ain't going to happen. Now, some of those problem exploration conversations may not be fun, but fun's not the point. Understanding is the point. Understanding doesn't just happen. It comes as we interact and listen and are present. That leads to increased safety. Increased safety leads to increased trust. I can't trust someone I don't feel safe with. I can't feel safe with someone who I don't sense is trying to understand me. I mean, can you? I mean, it's not rocket science, is it? And you see how all this kind of goes back to if I'm reacting out of my amygdala and reacting out of anger? How there's no way this can happen. Increased trust leads to increased effectiveness. So trust needs safety. Safety needs understanding. Understanding comes through collaboration and problem exploration. And as you take time to go through this, friends, it will make a lot of sense. I know I'm giving you a lot, but we felt like 2 hours. And I'm going to go a wee bit over, but not a lot over. So, and if you have to leave, God bless you. Go and sin no more. Those of you who can stay, good. The challenge of healthy problem exploration. Again, this is homework. What keeps many people from facing and dealing with conflict? Okay? What keeps many people? Then, what's the cost of not confronting issues? I'm asking a similar question now in a slightly different way. And in one sense, the answer is one that none of us can afford. Another is it only exacerbates, complicates, increases. So if you want to make things worse, if it ain't got enough pain, then just stuff it and keep on doing the same dance. What excuses do many people use? But then what excuses do I use? You guys, to take some time with this. I can't change. It's too hard. I'm not sure where to start. And when sometimes you're not going to find out what the 2 steps are down the road until you take the next step. And then you take the next step. Well, my problem is too complicated. Yeah, right now it is. It may take 10 steps. And until you take the first one, you may not be clear or have the resources to see, let alone do, the second one. And that's why changing these patterns takes some time. A positive interpretation, I choose to understand, and that leads to success. So, 7 simple steps through conflict to success. Again, these are here. I'm going to go through them quickly because I want to land on something and take about 4 or 5 minutes. Define the issue, okay? Define the issue. I can't count the number of folks I've worked with, couples, families, corporate groups, management teams who are trying to solve a problem and no one's really defined the issue. Or we have 5 definitions. Again, these are in your notes. The power of choosing understanding, some classic verses. Those are there for you. Understanding involves both the emotional brain and the rational brain. Okay? Understanding involves both. And understanding involves both is a key to understanding. And there are different kinds of understanding. Level 1 is the actual words I thought I heard you say. And level 2 is what you didn't say with your lips, what you might not have been able to put into words, but what you did say with your eyes and your face and your heart. And that involves being present and listening, okay? That's what that involves, what you said with your eyes and your face and your heart. I will never be able to resolve or manage what I don't choose to understand. And guys, these are simple steps, but you have to do them. Step 5 is how important is it? Is it high ticket or low ticket? I have couples that I've worked with who've gotten a divorce and came to see me because someone they knew had seen me. And we've been divorced for a year and a half. And as I worked with them, as it came out, some of the main reasons that they got divorced were on a scale from 1 to 10, were like a 3 or a 4. But because they didn't know how to talk about it, because buttons got pushed, they thought it was a 9 or a 10. It wasn't. It wasn't. They didn't know how to hear, didn't know how to understand, didn't know how to process. I was stunned as a younger therapist that something so small could cause the demise of a relationship. But it wasn't the size of the perceived problem. It's the inability to define it, to understand it, and to have the skills to keep their buttons from being pushed so they could process it. Does that make sense? Do I need to apologize or ask for forgiveness? 3 words that can change any relationship. I was wrong. Not bummer, not oops, but I was wrong. Here's what I did or said that was wrong. I'm sorry. Sorry means it's not going to happen again. If someone says I'm sorry 10 times for the same thing, they're not sorry. Okay? Find a different word. Okay? Godly sorrow brings about repentance. When I'm sorry, I'm going to do something different. So Stephanie, if I offend you, and I'm sorry, we're going to talk, and I will make sure it doesn't happen again, by God's grace. Okay? And then the last 3, please forgive me. It's a request, not a demand. They may choose to or not to. Step 4, ask yourself, what's my contribution to the problem? Spend some time here. Most of us are experts on what everybody else's contribution is. But what's my contribution? Again, Psalm 139, search me, know me, try me. Crazy is to find out what doesn't work and keep on doing it. Smart is to find out what does work and do more of it. So these 2 hours has been kind of equipping you with this. Step 5, again, in your notes, take radical responsibility by choosing what I can do differently. What can I do? Yeah, I can let the problem define me, but I can't change what happens to me. What can I change? What can I do? And sometimes the only thing I can change is my response. But over time, usually, when I respond and don't react, that itself begins to change the dynamic over time of the situation. Radical responsibility means that I accept, not agree with, not like, but I accept the other person just the way they are. One of my heroes is Mr. Rogers, but I don't have time to unpack that. I learned a lot from him. He came along after I was a kid, but my kids watched him. I thought he was so goofy. In fact, he was very easy to mock and make fun of, which I have good skills at, actually. But as I began to listen to his message, it was profound. Simple and simplistic are not synonyms. Step 6, choose what we can do differently, and step 7, just do it. So let me share the neurobiology of change and growth. I just have one more video to show you. Let me show you how neuroplasticity works. We've talked about it. We've talked about the brain, that you can rewire it. This is a short clip, but it's going to be very helpful. I have a few more words, and then I'll let you go.
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. I did something that damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill and I was really proud of it. Everything changed though when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Sandlin. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels, every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences, and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this. For instance, this guy, I offered him $200 just to ride this bike 10 feet across the stage. Everybody thought he could do it.
No, you didn't understand. So, this way. Okay. All right, just a second. All right, so, whenever you're ready. Yeah. Go ahead. No, you have to keep your feet on. Dude, all right, here we go. Just give it a wait. Like, you gotta start rolling at least. Go. And go. Oh, go! All right, back up. Okay, wait. Keep your feet on the pedal. Go. Go right off. Just keep your feet on the pedals. Handles on. Yeah, come on. All right, one more time.
Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck. But at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut.
Are you gonna give up? No. Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up, you got it. Did you see his brain get it? So he, in, how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult.
It's clear from this experiment that children have a much more plastic brain than adults. That's why the best time to learn a language is when you're a young child.
All right, today's bike log. I can ride smooth, I can ride fast. I'm thinking the experiment is over. Okay, now I'm in Amsterdam, a city that has more bicycles than people. The question is, can I ride a normal bike now? I mean, I've spent all this time unlearning how to ride a bike. If I go back and try to ride a normal one, will my brain mess up? So I've tweeted a Smarter Everyday meetup, if you will, and I'm gonna see if somebody brings a bicycle and I'm gonna try to ride a normal bike. It's backwards, it's backwards.
This was one of the most frustrating moments of my life. I had ridden a normal bike since I was 6, but in this moment I couldn't do it anymore. I had set out to prove that I could free my brain from a cognitive bias. But at this point, I'm pretty sure that all I proved is that I could only redesignate that bias.
So what you're not seeing is just a group of people here looking at me, looking at the strange American that can't ride a bike because they think I'm dumb. But I'm actually 2 levels deep into this because I've learned and unlearned. All right.
After 20 minutes of making a fool out of myself, suddenly my brain clicked back into the old algorithm. I can't explain it, but it happened in a very specific moment.
Got it. I'm back. Oh, it clicked. Hold it, it clicked. I got it. Okay, there it is. There was the moment. Okay, I can ride a bike.
I tried to explain this to the people around me, and they just didn't get it. They thought I was faking the previous 20 minutes, and I couldn't get anybody to believe me.
That looked like I faked that, didn't it?
Yeah.
Just a face. You think I'm faking. You don't believe me.
This looks so weird. You were like, la la la, and it's full.
You think I'm lying, don't you?
Yeah, I didn't.
I'm not lying.
I felt like the only person on the planet who had ever unlearned how to ride a bike, and I couldn't articulate it to anyone because everybody just knew that you can't forget how to ride a bike. So I learned 3 things from this experiment. I learned that welders are often smarter than engineers. I learned that knowledge does not equal understanding. And I learned that truth is truth, no matter what I think about it. So be very careful how you interpret things because you're looking at the world with a bias, whether you think you are or not. I'm Destin. You're getting smarter every day. Have a good one.
Isn't that great? I wish I could talk more about the whole neurological process of change again. That's outside the parameters of this. But one thing to think about, why is it so hard for me to change and grow? And one reason why for most people is that we look at the destination and not the fact that it's one step at a time. So if you think I can't become this, don't worry about that. Take the first step, whatever it is to you. Start at the beginning. I've tried to lay things out. I've tried to make it practical. So what might a next step look like? I mean, here's the deal. Information and inspiration without application leads to frustration. So if you never pick up this book again, you've learned a lot of stuff that you didn't know 2 hours ago. And I think you're the better for it, I hope. But if you pick it up again and take it one chapter at a time, one part at a time, and write it out, respond. And I've had folks who spent a couple months just on each part, seriously. Okay? I think you might be surprised because information and inspiration plus application leads to transformation. And that's what I do, why I do. That's why I do what I do is transformation growth. And I'm still in process, you guys, as you are. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting night. So, I want to thank the tech guys here. Let's give them a hand, okay? They got things set up and they put up with my quirks, and this wouldn't happen without them. And I want to thank Amy, your team, because this wouldn't have happened without your work. So thank you. I want to thank you for coming. I'll stay around if some of you have some questions. I don't guarantee answers, but I'd like to close in a word of prayer, okay? God, thank you for, again, for JBU. Thank you for the fact that we're about not just our campus and our students, but we're about the community, about our area, about impacting the world. God, thank you that right now that the sun never sets on a JBU grad that is in some way serving you. And thank you, God, for being able to meet, my goodness. And thank you for all these folks who've come. Lord, I pray it's been helpful. I know I've probably given a little bit too much information. But I thank you, God, that step by step that you can help us digest it and apply it and use it for our growth. So we give the remainder of this day to you. And help us to be more aware of your presence. And God, I had 2 prayers I have for a couple of months since I had this on my calendar, that you would use this maybe to really encourage some folks who may have come here with some hurts, some wounds that they weren't aware of, and maybe weren't sure where they came from. And now, by your grace, have a wee bit more understanding. And maybe, God, a wee bit more hope and a wee bit more encouragement. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Amen. Thank you.